fight!
Let's talk Street Fighter. Now we're going to be talking about Street Fighter Assassin's Fist. However, I'm going to be talking about Street Fighter in general first of all. Now, Street Fighter is a very, very popular video game series, and it really started from Street Fighter 2, the second game, that really was the kind of the catalyst for this massive title that's kind of spawned decades. And this came out in the kind of the early 90s, and it's probably the game that actually got me interested in playing video games first of all. And the game is very simple. It's ultimately a kind of one-on-one fighting game tournament, and that's pretty much it. And all these characters had a little bit of backstory. Now, since then, we've had a variety of different sequels and spin-offs from the actual video game series as well. Very famously, we've had a live adaptation. We've had a couple of live-action adaptations, actually. The most famous one being probably the Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. But we've also had animated series with animated movies and a whole bunch of other sort of pop culture input from from other things, from G.I. Joe to all sorts of stuff. And then a few years ago we had a short film called Street Fighter Legacy. And this was ultimately a kind of fan film, but it really was a very good adaptation, or a literal adaptation of the Street Fighter mythos, and it was probably the truest live action adaptation that we've seen. And from that, we have now the Street Fighter Assassin's Fist, which is basically a full series. And it features a lot of the sort of creative team behind it. So the guy who plays Ken Masters is the same actor, for example, Christian Howard, I think his name is. And this is really an origin story of Ken, who is essentially this American, well, he's an American kid when we sort of first see him, and he's basically sort of dropped off of this sort of dojo in Japan to be sort of like trained up after his kind of the death of his mother. And there he meets Ryu, who is this Japanese guy who ultimately becomes his kind of comrade in arms and brother and best friend. And he's been there since he was a young boy and sort of trained after this master martial artist called Goken. And he basically takes Ryu and Ken and is training them in this kind of sort of mystic, very kind of secretive martial art that involves kind of supernatural elements, shall we say. But along with those characters, we have a lot of backstory from Goken himself and his brother Gokai, who is ultimately the bad guy. And a lot of the film is actually sort of spent in flashback, showing Goken and Gokai as they train and with their master, and kind of how the kind of the evil forces have corrupted Gokai and kind of turned him into something else, which I will come on to in a little bit. Now, this, as I say, was originally a web series, but I watched it as a feature film. Now, I have to say, the main criticism I'm going to have here of this as a film is it's way too long, and it drags. As a feature film, this drags. It's just under 2.5 hours long. I think it's 2 hours 20 minutes, something along the lines of that, and it really drags in the kind of in the middle sections, particularly the flashback scenes. And the reason I think for that is when we sort of see Ken and Ryu on screen, they have quite a good chemistry, and they're kind of interesting characters, and they're characters that we maybe know a little bit better. But I think too much time is spent in flashback, and it's just not very interesting. I think the kind of the Goken and Gokai characters are a lot more sort of two-dimensional, and I think far too much time is spent in that, and that could have been massively trimmed down, and it would have made the film a lot more punchy. Now, as a series, it may be a little bit different, because obviously that's, if you look at it, it's going to be longer than the film. But as you watch it as a film, I never watched it as a series. Unfortunately, it does drag because of that, and that is my major criticism. If this was trimmed down and edited just a little bit more, it would have been a lot more punchy and a lot more of an interesting film. But at the moment, and I'm a kind of maybe not a hardcore fan, but I am a fan of the sort of the Street Fighter mythos, and I found myself getting a little bit bored. So, if you are a huge fan of this mythos, I will say this: you may get kind of a bit more from it.
Shoryuken!
Now, I guess it depends what you're looking at. If you're just a martial arts fan, but maybe not a gamer, you're going to find maybe the mythos a little bit heavy, and I think it does crumble on itself a little bit and gets a little bit too sort of metaphysical, the kind of the backstory and this kind of this sort of dark supernatural power that these sort of guys are training in. And although it does have some fantastically choreographed martial arts, and when we do have these, then there's quite a lot of fights that are peppered between all the kind of like the sort of backstory. They're always pretty decent. They're always good fights. They do use a lot of slow-mo, admittedly. However, I have to say I really enjoyed all the fight scenes. You know, everyone does a fantastic job, and the camera work, the direction, the acting between the, you know, well, the physical acting, I guess, is all excellent and really, really enjoyable. You know, so again, it's going to depend on what what you're interested in. If you are a Street Fighter fan, you're going to get more from it. There's lots of different sort of name drops and kind of little Easter eggs here and there about sort of characters who maybe we don't see on the screen, but they're kind of hinted at. The other main characters I'm going to have here is Akuma. Now, Akuma is essentially Darth Vader of the kind of the Street Fighter universe, and he is the brother of Goken, who is the kind of the master of Ken and Ryu. And he's ultimately originally this guy called Goken. It's kind of like Anakin Skywalker turning into Darth Vader, basically. He's kind of corrupted by this dark power and comes across as basically this big brutish villain. But even with Street Fighter and its kind of supernatural sort of fireballs and kind of things like that, Akuma is just too ridiculous for live action. I think he looks ridiculous, and he just, unfortunately, looks a little bit too cartoony. The way he comes across is just so cheesy bad guy, when we have a kind of, you know, a faithful adaptation, but a kind of more realistic sort of look at sort of Ryu and Ken. Akuma just seems like a, you know, just a stupid cartoon character, unfortunately. And he looks ridiculous. He's kind of, you know, his hair sprayed up and all of that, and, you know, it doesn't look very good. So I've never really been a big fan of Akuma anyway in the games, but he certainly works better in there than he does, I think, in live action. Now, obviously, in this particular universe, you might say some of the other characters may look a bit stupid as well. Don't know, don't really see them, so I can't really comment. I was hoping maybe we'd see Garva go into a bar and they kind of fight these military guys. I thought, oh, maybe Garva was going to be here, but, you know, he wasn't. So that was possibly a missed opportunity there. But it's, okay, so how you're going to like this film is really depending on how much you're going to like Street Fighter. If you're a huge Street Fighter fan, you're going to get a lot from this because it is such a faithful adaptation. But even then, I think maybe if you watch it as a film, it may drag a little bit. If you're just a kind of martial arts fan, or more of just a casual Street Fighter fan, I think you may be a little bit kind of like perplexed about some of this kind of this backstory, this kind of mythology that it kind of throws at you. And also, again, I think it's a little bit long. But overall, considering it's probably not a huge budget, I'm not quite sure of the budget, but you know, it's probably not massive. It does a really good job of really capturing that sort of that Street Fighter flavour. And these characters look straight off the kind of straight out the video game. They're such good representations of the, you know, the actual characters. Very, very faithful in the way they look and the way they act. Ryu, maybe I always considered a bit more stoic than he is here. He seems just a little bit too unsure of himself to me, and I always thought Ryu was probably a little bit more of the kind of the stoic, very sure of himself, but not sort of flashy. Whilst here he maybe seemed a little bit weak to me, but that's just my personal opinion. I'd love to hear some, you know, if you think I'm off the ball there.
Hadouken!
So overall, like I said, I'm going to give this, as a movie, 7 out of 10. Very enjoyable. More so if you're a Street Fighter fan. I would have liked to have seen maybe kind of like an edited down version. However, now as a film, I think that works better. As a series, it may have benefited from the extended running time, but as a film, I don't think it works quite as well as it could have done. So 7 out of 10. What did you think of it? Leave me a comment. I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.